in terms of Diana, I think because she didn't conform to fit the mold, I really admire her. I think that, I've never met anyone in sport that has so much style and swagger. And I love that she said no. I love that she was just like fiercely loud. I just think that she has, she set a standard for today for female athletes who, can embrace being authentic. Diana was always she stayed authentically to herself. And I think we're seeing now athletes that recognize that Diana did that and are thanking her for that. And I think that it's important that is recognized. And I hope that is something that people learn and take away from this series because, she's a pioneer. Yeah.
Thanks for coming out to the show. Truly appreciate it. Before we delve into Taurasi, the docuseries, I want to start with a bit of a tradition on our podcast. We talk about basketball culture, what makes the game so great. So take this question any way you want it. What is your first or favorite basketball memory?
So my first sort of basketball memory is, I think Diana Taurasi is my entry point into this world. I grew up in Australia. I was an athlete, but I didn't have basketball on my screens. I obviously knew who Michael Jordan was, but the WNBA wasn't something that was on our screens in Australia. So women's basketball was just something that I didn't, follow.
So what drew you to this project? Just can you talk about the origin story of, your interest and how you got linked to it, and also your first impressions of Diana Taurasi overall.
So when this project came to me, I was coming off a project where I'd been following a women's soccer team, the Australian women's soccer team, the Matildas, in the lead up to the FIFA World Cup. And it was very much like a Drive to Survive type series where, I think the level of storytelling for the characters, was probably at a minimal. I wasn't going into the depth of these characters. So coming out of a doc like that, I was looking for something that was very much character driven. So when Taurasi came along, I didn't, I'd heard of her, but I didn't know a lot about her. And so when I was doing a deep dive on who she was as a player, I was obviously fascinated. And I think it made me want to, unravel and get to know who this person was off the court. So I was excited to meet her. And, the more and more I worked with her, the more and more I knew that I thought that this was going to be a great recipe for a great documentary.
How do you establish that rapport with another person? Because you're delving deep into their history. I'm sure you have to form trust. I mean, you're asking really extensive questions, maybe questions that might be extremely personal. How do you establish that rapport, and how long did it take to put this project together?
So I've been on this project for 2 years. And, I think that one of the first questions that I, asked Diana was I wanted to make sure that she was ready to tell the story. Like, it's one thing to have an opportunity for these athletes to have a doc on them. Quite often a production company might pitch it to the athlete and they might be in it for different reasons. But I wanted to make sure that she wanted to tell her story, because if I knew that I had her buy-in, then it was going to be great. And so when I knew I had her, and when I felt like the synergy between us, I think we got along really great. I knew that, she was going to be comfortable in telling her story. And I think that's one thing you're going to take away from this series, is that you feel like it's truly told from her voice, and that she, the story is from her own words, and it feels very natural.
So what was your first interview with Diana like? What was your strategy? Did you want to delve into just her earlier life or just her professional career? What was your kind of mind state just in terms of establishing that rapport and then getting what you need from her just to establish the tone? Because I'm sure, my guess is there's probably multiple interviews with her over that 2-year process. So like that first meeting with her, how did that go in that first interview as well?
Yeah, I feel like, it was in the beginning, it was less about basketball and it was more about her. And it was my plan actually to try to not talk too much about the main part of her career, and so I did start with the early days and her family and her childhood, and kind of getting into UConn, and that very much is our first episode, and I think that is always obviously a great start in just getting to know someone. It's kind of like dating in a way, like you're getting, you're getting to know these people, and you only have so much time with them. She was in her, final year of basketball. So I wasn't, hanging out with Diana very often just to hang out and earn that, friendship and trust and all of that. It was like when I was with her that those were the moments where we were working together. So I had to make the most of them without her feeling like it was too much. So I was trying to be very natural, and I think it worked.
So how does she approach just asking questions that might be personal? Um, did that come over time in terms of establishing that rapport? Did it take a little bit more to establish that trust, or was she fairly open in terms of just making sure that her story was told, even if some things, it might have kept private, but she wanted to get it out there? What was kind of that process like in terms of approaching subjects that might be kind of touchy, or you might have been worried that might offend her, or might kind of change the dynamic of your relationship?
I think because I was just trying to she's a human being, right? And I didn't know I wasn't like because I wasn't a WNBA fan growing up, I wasn't like starstruck by who Diana was. So when I was with her, I was going right in. I was asking her all the questions, and I think she was ready for that. And I think when you meet eye to eye, and when you feel comfortable with who you're working with, I think all of that becomes natural. I actually honestly I feel like I didn't have any issues like that. I think that she was ready to talk, and I was the right sounding board for her.
When she's reflecting on whether it's college, just the WNBA internationally, did she notice just different tones in her responses, or was she just reflecting on all of it? She knows any difference just in questions you asked about the University of Connecticut or the WNBA or internationally?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's three episodes, and I feel like, each episode tackles a different part in her life, and in her career, and I feel like we get a range of emotion, based on what we're talking about. Yeah, I don't, she's not answering the same question, in the same tone. I think that, we are going into a little bit more depth in the storytelling. So, for example, like when we talk about UConn, we're going into more of like her relationship with Gino, her coach, and the complexities of that relationship. And I think that draws up a lot of emotion. And then when we get to Russia, and we're talking about someone very close to her who ends up getting murdered, like, obviously different emotions associated with that. And then in our third episode, when she's, in her final year going to retire, I think audiences are probably going to feel a little bit of a quiet ache, and in watching that unfold. And I was actually surprised. I've worked with a lot of athletes, and maybe this is just a style of doc because it is a character driven doc on one person, but I feel like I got a lot of emotion from Diana. And I was surprised about that. And I think that, in agreeing to do this doc, like knowing that she had a lot of obstacles in her life on and off the court, that was obviously very appealing as a filmmaker. But I still had to kind of get the emotion from this person, in an interview, and even in our verite footage. And I think it's all there. And I think she's an amazing character, and just a really, really interesting subject for a documentary.
Can you walk myself and thus the audience that's listening and watching this through the process of when you're making a documentary, and particularly when the first episode starts, it's during the reunion of UConn's championship season. What's kind of your approach in terms of like setting up the camera and following Taurasi to her hotel room? That's kind of like a very intimate moment. She's just settling in, she's talking to her family, and then the later in that episode, it shows her um, just during that reunion, capturing Gina Auriemma, her cheering just her, the current UConn Huskies at the time, and then, gathering with her, former teammates. What was that process like? What is the logistics of pulling something of that nature off?
Well, obviously, there's a team behind me helping with the logistics. But Diana, she has to, allow us to be there and want us to be there filming. So, and sometimes people, sometimes you get there and you may not go and capture everything that you planned. But what I did find with Diana was every time we were with her, she was giving us something, her character in any type of verite scene, something funny happens. Like she's just got so much wit, and I think fans should be excited for what they might discover in this doc, because I think there's so much personality on the court, which everyone sees, but there's just so much in her every day as well. And I feel like we got a little bit of an insight there.
What was your strategy in interviewing others that were important in Diana Taurasi's life? I mean, she's considered in a lot of circles the greatest women's basketball player who ever lived. So there's tons of people to interview. What was your strategy in narrowing that list down? Was that a Herculean task and kind of finding, okay, we got to get Gino Auriemma, obviously, Sue Bird. Was there any others that didn't make the cut that you really wanted to interview, but there's only so much time you have in making this documentary?
I strategically really didn't want to do a Talking Heads documentary. Personally, I find them sometimes hard to follow. There were tons of people that we could have interviewed. And I really just wanted to keep it really close to Diana because I wanted those characters to develop throughout the series. So whoever was in the dark, they had to be someone that was very close because I wanted to develop that storyline throughout the series. So, certain scenes would become more powerful.
Was there anything surprising that you experienced while just capturing Diana's life that you went in that previously you weren't expecting, but once you got to know her more and the final product happened, you were fairly surprised that it occurred, positively or negatively?
A couple. Her parents are amazing characters. They obviously speak Spanish throughout the doc, and they don't speak great English. So when Diana, when she heard that I'd done their interview, she was joking that, had I only got like 10 minutes from them, and I'm like, no, more like 3 hours. She's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, we had a translator, but thank God we did do that because their commentary throughout the doc is priceless. They're hilarious, and you understand why Diana is how she is because of them. And I think their characters really land in episode 3 when we're at the Olympics with Diana, and they're right there, and it's the end of her career, and I think it's really emotional. Because so many sacrifices happened from the very beginning with her father, working 6 days a week, to support the family and the girls' sport and all of that. So I think that's a really beautiful story. In terms of like something that surprised me in the Verite filming with Diana, I was in the car with her when she was driving to her last game at the Phoenix Mercury. And something that I just was blown away by was when we were pulling into the car park, she was the first one there. And then we followed her in the change room, and the change room was empty. And she had just been an athlete that was the first and last to leave every game, every training session. And I kind of got the chills when I was there because it was such a beautiful moment because I was just like, this is why you are who you are in this sport. This is why you're the greatest. This is what separates the greats. And it was just such a beautiful image, just watching her sit down alone, at a final game, like, by herself. And she's just in a league of her own.
What was her feelings in terms of her retirement? Because I see with a lot of athletes, I think a lot of the fans, it's usually like a happy time in terms of just reflecting on that athlete's career. But I think for a lot of the athletes, it's usually a somber, it's a sad time. And you see athletes after they're done playing trying to reconcile what are they going to do afterwards. This one sport's been a part of their lives, forever, and now it's gone. And they try to find different things to replace it. But being on the court or field is just, it's not the same compared to what they're doing afterwards for the majority of athletes. So for Diana, during her retirement, what was that day like for her emotionally? Where's kind of her feelings going through it?
You know, first of all, I mean, it was obviously an honor to be able to have the cameras on her when she was going to retire that day. But obviously, so much of her retirement was going through her head prior to that day. It was obviously coming. This was the one area I was extremely sensitive to throughout the filming. Personally, even as a filmmaker, um, it's none of my business, when she was going to make that announcement. And I wanted her to feel that, like I, I was with her final year. So like, it's just, I wanted her to naturally, be ready with how and when she wanted to talk about that. And yeah, I think there are moments that we got, throughout our final interview where she does talk a little bit about it. But that was the one area I wasn't going to push too hard. I wanted her to be ready to talk about it. But I think with everything that we got, I think the final episode is magic.
You mentioned that with making this documentary, this docuseries, that you didn't want too many talking heads involved. And I just want to get in your take on just the creative process on sports documentaries nowadays. I know I'm a millennial, so in the 90s, they're pretty rare in terms of seeing sports documentaries, but now they're everywhere on all these streaming services. It's great. I'm just seeing all these stories being told. I'm just curious, with a lot of content that's being put out there now, does that affect the storytelling process in terms of telling a story that's unique to the athlete and not intentionally following whatever trends is out there? Does that matter in terms of what is happening else in the space of the sports documentaries? Or it's just strictly, hey, we're working on this project. It doesn't matter what's going on the outside. This is what we're particularly doing. If it matches something that's currently out there, so be it. This is what's right for this project.
Yeah, I mean, I knew going into it that this was already a little bit different to probably a lot of the women's sports docs that are being picked up right now, or you're seeing on the platform, which is, I think there's a lot of follow docs going on. Whether it's like current day unfolding stories placed in the WNBA or on a team, or maybe a few athletes across the season. And then the same, obviously, with women's soccer. I don't feel like there's a lot of series being made that are on accomplished athletes that maybe have just retired or going through retirement that has a long historical story. And so I'm excited that we had amazing support from our partners to be able to tell this story, because I just don't think that there's a lot out there for female athletes. And I hope that this creates a bigger appetite for more, because obviously there's so many untold stories. But when you think about, male athletes, I think that there's a ton of content and kind of in-depth kind of docu-series on one athlete that goes into historical stories that are told really well. I think Beckham's one of them, and obviously there's a ton on the platform. All you have to do is just go on there; they're all there. But I hope that this will sit up there, and I hope that streamers will potentially get behind more female athletes with similar stories.
Which part of Diana's legacy really resonated with you the most, and which do you think will resonate with viewers when they watch it? Are they one and the same, or are they different?
I think that there are obviously a lot of new fans in the WNBA right now. And I think that Diane, to understand the WNBA, and obviously there's a lot of legendary players before Diana, with Diana, but I think if it wasn't for Diana, the WNBA wouldn't be here. And I think that Diana's story, so I think this series, I think, is the prequel to where we are today. I think it's the origin story. She is the game changer to this sport. So I hope that fans and mainstream audiences can learn and also take away that if it wasn't for Diana, we just wouldn't be here today with the WNBA having this cultural moment.
Since you said earlier that you didn't know too much about Diana before making this documentary or just the WNBA as a whole, what's your impressions of the league afterwards? I'm just curious, like, what has she learned? Was there anything that changed or surprised you just about women's basketball in America or just internationally? And how did Diana play into that just in terms of, forming your opinion now that the documentary is over?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there are a lot of women's sports that have been treated in similar ways, but I think this is a league that definitely has had the hard end of the stick. I mean, I the fact that it's just taking so long, when clearly there is a want for this league right now. I think that brands need to obviously take a deeper look of the value of this league, because people want it. It's blowing up. It's here. It's there. And if the CBA agreements can't change or improve, like that's really sad, because there's been so many people like Diana and so many other athletes that have just done so much work to stay in there and get the league to where it is. It'd just be sad if they couldn't turn it around. And who knows, like if the players are going to stop because of it. So we'll see.
Yeah. Hopefully, they can get a better deal. They deserve it. And I think that the sport's at a breaking point, that it's set to really reach new heights.
But I think in terms of Diana, I think because she didn't conform to fit the mold, I really admire her. I think that, I've never met anyone in sport that has so much style and swagger. And I love that she said no. I love that she was just like fiercely loud. I just think that she's set a standard for today for female athletes who can embrace being authentic. Diana was always she stayed authentically to herself. And I think we're seeing now athletes that recognize that Diana did that and are thanking her for that. And I think that it's important that is recognized. And I hope that is something that people learn and take away from this series, because she's a pioneer and
Yeah.
she led the way.
Yeah, totally agree. Katie, thank you very much for spending some time with us. Can you please let our audience know if you're available on social media, any upcoming projects, anything else you want our audience to be aware of?
Yeah, just obviously go see Taurasi. And we're starting to promote this. My social media is just my name, Katie Van de Ven. And thank you so much for having me, Justin.
Likewise, thanks for making the time. Congratulations on this project. I think it's a must-see for any basketball fan out there, and it's appreciate you making the time. Thank you.
Absolutely.